So what if there were two completely different blueprints for a Messiah floating around in the ancient world? I mean, one, a kind of legal contract for a human king, and the other, a mythic archetype for a god-man. Well, a pretty compelling analysis argues that to really understand one of history's most influential figures, you first have to know which blueprint you're even looking at.
And that really gets to the heart of it, right? Was the Messiah supposed to be a human king? Someone bound by these super strict legal requirements? Or was the idea more of a deified God-man, one who fits a totally different mythic pattern? As you're about to see, the answer really depends entirely on which blueprint you use as your guide.
All right, so what are these two competing models? Let's lay out the architectural plan, so to speak, for two very, very different kinds of Messiah.
So on one side, you've got the Jewish Messiah from the Tanakh, a human king, totally defined by legal covenants. And on the other side, a reconstructed version of the Babylonian Messiah, a deified God-man, basically born from mythic archetypes in ancient mystery religions. These two are the clashing frameworks for this entire analysis.
Okay, let's kick things off with the Davidic king. And you gotta understand, for this blueprint, the requirements laid out in the Tanakh aren't just some vague prophecies. They're a strict, non-negotiable legal checklist.
And wow, what a checklist it is. The Messiah must be a direct paternal descendant of King David. He must physically restore the temple in Jerusalem, and he has to literally bring about an era of world peace. And listen, these aren't symbolic goals. They're tangible, real-world accomplishments that have to be fulfilled during his lifetime. And that first requirement, lineage, it all hinges on this one super critical Hebrew word, zera. It means seed or offspring. And in the legal context of the Davidic covenant, this isn't symbolic at all. It means the line must pass directly from father to son. We're talking about a strict biological requirement.
But you know, this whole paternal requirement, it runs into a huge roadblock. The prophet Jeremiah pronounced a curse on King Jeconiah's and his entire bloodline, stating that none of his zera, his direct descendants, could ever prosper on David's throne. This is a permanent divine disqualification. All right, so let's shift gears. We're going to leave the legal courts of ancient Israel for a minute and head over to the mystical temples of Babylon to look at that second blueprint. And this model, well, it's reconstructed from research into a very different kind of Messiah. And the contrast is just immediate. We've gone from legal covenants to these big mythic themes. The focus completely shifts to a worshipped mother and child, a God-man who was slain and then resurrected, a voluntary sacrifice for sin, and, interestingly, a deep connection to the sun.
And this whole connection to sun worship, it gets really concrete when you look at the dates. A conception on March 25th, a birth on December 25th, these dates aren't found in the Tanakh. Instead, they align perfectly with ancient pagan solar festivals celebrating the death and rebirth of the sun around the winter solstice.
So we've got our two blueprints laid out, the Davidic king and the Babylonian God-man. Okay, so now for the big question, which set of plans does the New Testament narrative actually follow? First up, let's test the lineage. The Tanakh demands direct paternal seed, zera, from David. But while the New Testament traces Jesus' lineage through his father Joseph, it also states that Joseph was not his biological father. So from the Tanakh's strict legal perspective, this creates a fundamental contradiction right out of the gate. And the problem gets even deeper. Remember that curse on King Jeconiah? Well, Matthew's genealogy traces Joseph's line directly through him. This creates what the analysis calls an inescapable paradox. See, if you claim the throne through Joseph's lineage, you inherit the curse. But if you renounce it, you lose the required paternal zera. It's a total legal catch-22. Okay, next, the analysis digs into that famous virgin birth prophecy, and it points to a really critical shift in translation. The original Hebrew in Isaiah uses the word ha'alma, which means the young woman, and it was referring to a specific short-term sign for a guy named King Ahaz. But the New Testament relies on the later Greek translation parthenos, which means virgin, and it reframes that historical sign as a future messianic prophecy. And this is where the argument gets really, really challenging from a legal standpoint. According to Jewish law, which is known as halacha, a child's legal status is everything. And based on the New Testament's own account, a child born to a woman who was betrothed to one man but fathered by another, that child would be legally classified as a mamzer. Now, this status wasn't just a label, it came with severe legal and social disqualifications that, the analysis argues, would absolutely bar that person from the throne of David. So, if the narrative doesn't quite fit the Davidic blueprint, what about the other one? This brings us to the final verdict, and it all hinges on the alleged parallels with that Babylonian model. And right here, this is where the whole argument just snaps into focus. On one side, you have all the alleged failures to meet the Davidic legal standard, the paternal lineage issue, the curse of Joconias, the reinterpreted prophecy. And on the other side, you have these striking parallels with a Babylonian archetype, the focus on a mother and child, a slain and resurrected God, and even those key festival dates that align so perfectly. And all of this leads the analysis to its final, really stark conclusion, that the New Testament narrative represents not the fulfillment of the Davidic king, but the successful rebranding of the Babylonian Messiah. And that really leaves us with a bigger question to think about, doesn't it? How do these ancient structures, these strict legal codes on one hand, and these powerful, pervasive mythologies on the other, how do they continue to shape our modern world, our beliefs, and even our identities in ways we might not even realize? Definitely something to ponder.